Welcome. We're on class 2 of How Buddhism Helps, really short and sweet course on based on the 3 principal aspects of the path. So it's a teaching by Lama Tsongkhapa, the founder of this lineage of Buddhism, that really encapsulates everything that we need to know in the path to get started as beginners. And I know it can be quite overwhelming when you first come across Buddhism. The teachings are so vast, so spread out over many, many different topics and approaches. It's hard to know where to start, but this is the place to start. So we've already had the first class, and what we covered already on that first class was what the 3 principal aspects of the path are: renunciation, Bodhicitta and the correct view. And we looked at the correct view, or a realistic view of reality, being in tune with reality. And most of how we relate to the world, to people, to our circumstances is actually out of step with reality. We have a little bit of a shorthand just so that we can relate to others, but we're often kind of take it too far and get out of step or out of tune with reality. So the way to kind of unpick that one was to become aware how things exist on different levels. They don't exist inherently, or they certainly don't exist how they first appear to us. And we can intellectually understand that, but when we're actually out in the world, we completely forget about this. So if you can remember the 3 different ways that things exist: on causes and conditions, they exist in dependence on their parts, and in dependence on imputation. So the causes and conditions we can kind of get quite easily. Think about how much is $1? So how much is $1? It changes, doesn't it? It depends on what country you're in. It depends if it was last week, the Australian dollar last week when I sent money overseas. Should have waited for this week when it went up. Depends on the stock markets, depends on the weather, and depends on whether it's cash, which you can't use, or if it's just pixels of light. So even though we have this convention of $1, it depends on many, many, many things. It's not the actual piece of money in there, in that piece of paper or whatever it is. Depends on all the causes and conditions. It depends also on its parts. So that one, the example that we had last week was how old we are. And we have a conventional age, how old we are. But if we actually start looking at this body and going, well, how old is my skin? How old is my heart? How old are my lungs? How old's my stomach? They're all different ages. I think, whatever it is, the skin cells replenishes every 7 years, or the stomach this many, and actually our hair is dead. Our fingernails, once they come out there, they're dead. So how old is that? Finished. So when we start looking, we find that we can't actually pinpoint. It's all different parts, and it just, as we're trying to find how old we are, the closer we look, the more it disintegrates. We can also do this with gender. Just, deciding what gender you are depends on so many things, not just on hormones, not just on biological factors, not just on testosterone or all of these different things, to the extent that even the Athletics Federation doesn't have a definition of gender because they can't pin it down. So it kind of, those 2 things lead us to the third one, which is imputation. Things exist by name, by mere name, or by convention. And so we pinpoint it. We go, for working purposes, this is how old I am, or for working purposes, this is what gender is. And if we don't have a name for it, it's very difficult to pinpoint it as well. So I was thinking of, there are some tribes that only count to 3. So they have 1, 2, 3, and then many. So for them, 7, 8, 9, 10 doesn't exist because it doesn't have a name, doesn't have a word to pull it into existence. And in terms of music also, like we have a scale. We can hear, easily we can hear about 12 notes. Sometimes semitones, we might be able to hear 24 notes. The Bulgarians hear 32 notes on our scale. So they have each one divided into 4 and sometimes 8 that they can discern as individual notes, and they have names for them. But of course, I can't hear that. So depending on imputation, on name, that's really what it comes down to. And in the Buddhist terminology, it's mere name. And so then we also had some reflection sheets. Lou, did you manage to do any of the reflection sheets? I think the one was the wisdom worksheet. There was the meditation on a dependently arising self. Who am I really? The little pondering to do over your morning coffee. And then the worksheets on dependent origination. So it's just a way of looking at what happens during the week, and instead of just going by the appearances as we do, and then we jump to conclusions, being able to start finding different causes and conditions, and if one of those things changes, then everything changes. Yeah. So today we're going to look at the next one, which is renunciation. And I'll get our little screen share up. So what we've covered so far, when do we have our birthday? And today, so renunciation, meaning if we can develop renunciation, it means that we won't get distracted. We won't waste our time, and we won't get distracted from our core values. So from what really matters to us. So much of our life is just spent on just rubbish, on losing our energy and getting sucked into social media and whatever. And then before you know it, a day's gone, a week's gone. And have we spent any time at all on what really matters? And it's so easy to do. So renunciation helps with this. Renunciation, also we have a meditation on how to let go of the worldly concerns. So there are all those fears and anxieties that hold us back, that then later on we regret. They say we actually regret the things we don't do more than the things that we have done. But the things that we haven't done, or the things that we've lost, they're the things that we really regret. So how to actually let go of the worldly concerns so we're not scared, we don't have those kind of regrets. And also it means we can keep a level head. We cannot lose our head, not panic in times of uncertainty. So we can kind of set our motivation, thinking that the reasons that we came here today. So we might have reasons, just the current ones, the immediate conditions or circumstances, a particular problem or an issue, and that's a really good place to start, because it means that it's something personal. So that whatever that we talk about and contemplate today is going to be integrated into our life. So that's a good place to start. And then think about really long-term goals and aspirations. So if there's nothing holding us back, what would we be wanting to achieve, to accomplish in our life? How would we like to be able to help others if we could? We might also have long-term questions. So bring them to mind as well. And then to kind of gather up our motivation, we can think everything that we think about and discuss today, may it be seeds for our own liberation from the machinery of samsara, liberation from cyclic existence, and may it also be seeds for our own full enlightenment. So bringing forth all of our nascent or innate qualities so that we can perfectly help not just ourselves but everybody else. So that's the best motivation that we can have. With that, let's have a look at what is renunciation. So I've got to admit, when I hear this word, I think I kind of recoil for a moment. It's almost like a dirty word, because I just assume renunciation means, oh, you can't have any fun. It's just an instinctual kind of response that I have. But actually, that's the total opposite from what renunciation is. Renunciation is actually wishing to be free of the cycle of dissatisfaction. And one of the translations apparently for renunciation is the determination to emerge, to definitely emerge. So to emerge from the sea of samsara, the sea of cyclic existence, the constant ups and downs of cyclic existence. So we have this real determination to emerge from that. And it is based on the correct view of understanding what the causes are. And because there are causes, then we can do something about it. So actually, the determination to emerge from what? From cyclic existence, from suffering and craving, from all the problems. So not just wishing, oh, I wish it wasn't quite so bad, or I hope they don't suffer too much. Having this wish to be completely free from suffering and its causes. So what are we renouncing? First off, what we automatically renounce is suffering. Everybody does. No one wants to suffer. When things go wrong, we go, oh no, we wish it wasn't so. Not just us, but if you've got pets, they too renounce suffering. They don't want to suffer. So just not wishing to suffer isn't enough. And this is what I found a bit of a revelation, because often we can be going along and we think our life is fine until something goes wrong, and then we think, oh, this not wanting things to go wrong is renunciation, but it's not. That's just renouncing suffering. Then we can go to the other extreme. We think, oh, well, then I've just got to give up everything and renounce happiness. And no, there's nothing wrong with enjoying the small joys of life. Actually, there's nothing wrong with enjoying the good things in life. It is fantastic, and we need a level of enjoyment, or we become completely overwhelmed and can't do anything. So we're not renouncing happiness. So what are we renouncing? We're renouncing the causes of suffering. And this is something we haven't done before. So whenever we have a problem, we renounce the suffering part, but we hold on to the cause of it so that it happens again and again. Because the causes aren't immediately apparent to us. So we actually grasp onto them. And that's why we keep on having problems happen again and again. So renunciation is to actually renounce suffering and all of its causes. And that's the new thing. That's why up until now we've been stuck. So what are the causes? Pretty much the root cause is this ignorance of the nature of reality and the ignorance of how we exist. In that way that we looked at last week, independence on causes and conditions, on parts, past, present, future, and on mere name, imputation, calling it. So because we forget about all of that and we just relate to the conventional reality as if it were true, this is me, that's the root cause of all of the problems. Then we get the problems and we don't want the problems, but we never let go of that thought, this is me. So it keeps on going. And because we grasp so tightly to the this is me, that is actually a totally changing thing all the time, then we get easily intimidated, disturbing emotions arise, craving, anger, frustration, and then we act out on those, and then everybody responds back to us. Everybody's reactive, everyone becomes everybody else's trigger, and the whole catastrophe unfolds. So it is very easy to renounce the suffering, but it's tricky to remember to renounce the causes as well. So let's have a look at how come this is so tricky. And the thing to do is to look at what are called the 3 types of suffering, because we're pretty much familiar with the first one, obvious pain, obvious suffering. Whether it's physical pain and discomfort or illness, whether it's emotional pain, depression, misery, fear, all of those things, whether it's kind of emotional baggage and our background and various traumas that we're carrying, but it's obvious and we can see it in ourselves, we can see it in others, and we call it suffering. But there's another level of it. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama called it this amazing term, which is the suffering we are seeking, the suffering we run toward. So here we have a picture of, it could be me, conked out after too many glasses of champagne all those years ago when I used to drink. So the suffering that we are seeking is the one that you run towards with the champagne, never thinking about the rest of the story the morning after. So all of the worldly pleasures, food, music, sex, alcohol, what happens is that what at first is pleasurable turns into its opposite. And it's because we think that the happiness comes from out there. And so then we think, therefore, if I have more of it, I'll be more happy. Fatal mistake. So the suffering that we are seeking, called changeable suffering, but it could equally be called changeable happiness. It's where the pleasurable or the happiness experience turns into its opposite. It's unstable or unreliable. And this is the one that we run towards all the time. You know, with money, with the stock market, you think it's going to be a sure thing. It's just going up, 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 and then it changes into its opposite. Or, you know, you're so busy and you just want a break, and then you have self-isolation, and then, yay, I've got a bit of a break, and then suddenly, oh, now I'm really lonely. Constantly turning into its opposite, and pretty much because we're just grasping at those things out there. And then there's another level, a third level of the kind of the internal driver of all of this, which is the suffering of being dominated by ignorance. So this is kind of the state of play, that none of us wants problems, but we continuously make problems. None of us wants suffering, but we continuously do things that create suffering. And why? It's because we look for happiness outside of ourselves. We always seek happiness outside of ourselves. Because we are dominated by ignorance, we don't know any better. So we all want to be free of suffering, but we keep the causes. Now, you got any questions or comments? while I find my reading. So here's a little bit from Lama Yeshe. So this is the kind of basis of this course, The Essence of Tibetan Buddhism, which is a really short, sweet book on the three principal aspects of the path. So Lama Yeshe says, the three principal aspects, renunciation, bodhicitta, and the wisdom of shunyata. That's the Sanskrit term. These three are called the principal or essential paths to liberation. I want you to understand why they're called the three essential or principal paths. Because in the Western world, the word renunciation has a different connotation. People get scared when they lose their pleasure. But without renunciation, there's no way out. First of all of us consider that we'd like to be free from ego mind and the bondage of cyclic existence. But what binds us to cyclic existence, or samsara, and makes us unhappy is not having renunciation. So what is renunciation? What makes us renounced? The reason we are unhappy is because we have extreme craving for sense objects, samsaric objects, and we grasp at them. We're seeking to solve our problems, but we're not seeking in the right place. The right place is our ego grasping. We have to loosen that tightness, that's all. So I want you to understand that renouncing sensory pleasure doesn't mean throwing nice things away. Even if you do, it doesn't mean you've renounced them. Renunciation is a totally inner experience. Renunciation means less craving. It means being more reasonable instead of putting too much psychological pressure on yourself and acting crazy. The important point for us to know then is that we should have less grasping at sense pleasures, because most of our time, our grasping at and craving desire for worldly pleasure does not give us satisfaction. That's the main point. It leads to more dissatisfaction and to psychologically crazier reactions. If you have the wisdom and method to handle objects of the five senses perfectly, such that they do not bring negative reactions, it's all right. But as human beings, we should be capable of judging for ourselves how far we can go into the experience of sense pleasure without getting mixed up and confused. I'm looking at that champagne. We should judge for ourselves. It's completely up to individual experience. It's like French wine or champagne. Some people cannot take it at all, even though they'd like to. The constitution of their nervous system doesn't allow it. But other people can take a little and others can take a bit more. And so it goes. So, yeah, so Lou, you found isolation to be good to stop a lot of the suffering, because you've been made to pause and reflect on what's really important. Yeah, there's 2 points to that, isn't there? Because one, with isolation, it means less shopping, less indulgent, chit chat, less of that kind of distractions. And so we're actually freed from a whole lot of that consumerist, materialist pressure. So that's one of, and that's actually one of the Buddhist things, is to seek solitude, mental solitude, freedom from all those distractions that just, the constant barrage of noise and advertising. So if you're at home, you're free of all of that. So there's that. And then the space opens up to reflect. And it's like the mist's clear, isn't it? That things become apparent. Actually, what matters here? And as many people have found, all of the stuff, going to the nail salon or doing this or doing that, you can live without all of that. Actually, it's much better being thrown back on your own resources and figuring out how to do it all at home. So that's been like a society-wide revelation for us who live in a fairly comfortable, affluent society where we can self-isolate. And yeah, the possibilities open up. So it's quite ironic, isn't it? But then again, it hasn't opened up to everybody, because the people that have been relying on those external entertainments, validation from friends, physical comfort, all of those things, if you rely on those things and they're taken away, then we see just how beholden we are to circumstances and how we'll never be happy if we are. And there's many people with that self-isolation that their social anxiety has gotten worse and their depression and isolation has gotten worse because they think that to feel close to people you have to physically be close to them. It doesn't necessarily follow, does it? You just be close in your heart. So what it's done is really just brought things to the extreme, hasn't it? Made it really clear. So let's have a look. I've got this great quote from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and why I've put this picture of being dominated by ignorance as a moth to the flame. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, we just kind of think about this quote for a moment. When moths see a candle flame, they think it's a good place to go. So we're thinking about the suffering we run towards. They don't think that it will burn their body. They have no fear. If they were afraid, they wouldn't so purposefully fly right into it. The more you try to stop them, the harder they try and enter the flame. When those moths fly into the flame, they're expecting only peace and happiness. They have no desire to suffer. They don't plan on getting burnt. So why do they go there? It's because they have no fear. Their lack of fear is due to their lack of understanding that if they go there, they'll suffer. What happens is the complete opposite to what those ignorant creatures think will happen. They get burnt and they die. It's very important to understand why they force themselves to experience this suffering, what makes them do it. Understanding this is the real science. This is the best way of studying science. Why do the moths intentionally fly into the flame? Why do they try their hardest to get into it as quickly as possible? It's because of their own ignorance. The mental obscuration that prevents them from discovering the actual nature of the situation, that the fire is hot and will burn them. Their ignorance makes them perceive the situation differently from the fact of it. Some people might think that the moths are happy to be in there, but they're not. If they knew what was going to happen, they'd avoid it at all costs. It's so sad, isn't it? And I mean, this is us. We're moths to the flame. We see those things out there. They look fantastic. We run, we grasp at it. And then all the rest of the story becomes apparent. All the consequences, it turns into its opposite. And we're devastated. We're shocked. We cannot believe it. So, you know, the moth story, it just breaks my heart for the moths. And then I think, yeah, we're the same, aren't we? We're really the same. So being dominated by ignorance, the fault is with ignorance. And that's really why in the first class we looked at wisdom, because it underlies everything and it's the only way to really be free. So if we can start pulling back and instead of thinking, you know, grasping out of, after that apparent happiness out there that's actually changes into its opposite, into suffering, what do we do instead? If we develop renunciation, it actually means that our life will become better, not worse. It will become more enjoyable. So this is something it's counterintuitive, but it's really important to get your head around. So like Lama Yeshe said, it doesn't mean that we give up our friends or our possessions or our enjoyments or anything like that. What it means is we give up our distorted relationship to them. So the distorted relationship is assuming that the happiness lies in the object. And therefore, if I got the object, I'll be happy. So whether it's more champagne, whether it's a person, whether it's a political idea or system, whether it's money or future plans for travel, all of those external things. We have a distorted relationship with them because we think our happiness comes from them. And so, of course, grasping at that's just going to create more and more suffering. So we don't have to give up those things. We don't have to give up the idea of travel or relationships or food, just our distorted relationship. So it's our mental attitude of being uncontrollably attached to the pleasures of cyclic existence that's the problem. And why? In a way, it's because we're attached to second best. We're attached to things that will change into their opposite, that will wear out, that don't bring lasting happiness. That's what we're grasping after, instead of looking, where can lasting happiness be found? So that's that ignorance that clouds us, isn't it? We're just not looking in the right place. So we could have a phrase of, don't give up what you want most, what you're craving most, for what you want now. So we're kind of a little bit like on the sushi train of existence. We just want these things now, and we miss that big picture. And like you said, Lou, with self-isolation, then slowly actually the things that we want most that really matter, they become apparent. So if we can do that, then actually immediately our life becomes better. We're more relaxed. And how difficult is it to relax these days? And how many people just go, I just want to be able to feel some peace and calm just now. Just ordinary relaxation is so elusive. So with renunciation, immediately we relax. We're not so uptight about if we're going to get or lose the things that we want. We're naturally more optimistic because we can see room to move in a situation. You know, like if I'm able to work, great. But if I'm isolated at home, great. We can have that space to enjoy what's happening to us at the moment. Less stress and worry. So immediately there's a big incentive there. Also for what's called middle length, our lifespan, this life, we have internal stability. We'll never get the external stability that we want, but internally our mind will be stable. We'll be able to roll with the punches, and we'll be able to die without regret, without having missed those big things that were really important that we never got to. Bring some meaning to our life. So yeah, that's right, really relax and not just plugged into TV or social media. So that's kind of actually counted as distraction. So it's kind of like this artificial stimulation and doesn't actually give us rest. So where our attention is captured, we're pulled along, and it's kind of entertaining, but we're not rejuvenated by it. Ultimately, from a Buddhist point of view, with renunciation, this is the thing that means that we can become completely free from all problems, the complete and permanent cessation of all suffering, because we've released the causes of suffering. So if we don't have the causes of suffering, it's impossible to suffer. So from an ultimate point of view, it's crucial. It's like it's the whole purpose from our own side, for our own happiness, we must develop renunciation. And so then we get lasting happiness, not just a 50% happiness, but 100% happiness. And not one that can be taken away from us or changes into something else, but actually lasting peace, contentment. So what an amazing thing to aim for. So if this is what we're aiming for, then how come we don't just cut to the chase and do this? Why do we get distracted? What's kind of going wrong here? And what's going wrong is what are called the 8 worldly concerns. And there are 4 pairs of worldly concerns, meaning in the world, unstable concerns, unreliable concerns, and they capture our attention. We get completely obsessed about them, and they stop us from really concentrating on those big things, on making life meaningful, and of the actual causes of happiness. So worldly concerns, it's not a value judgment, it's just pointing out that they're unstable, unreliable. And when we are laboring under them, it means that our happiness is always dependent on circumstances, on others, and we have no freedom. Plus, they're addictive. So it's a little bit like drinking salt water. It's nice at first, but then it's just we need more. So let's have a look at them. So first, the most obvious ones. We're always seeking pleasure, comfort, nice things, and avoiding pain or discomfort or unpleasant things. And if we were really seeking happiness and the causes of happiness, then we wouldn't do things like get caught out. You have one slice of cake, oh, that's nice, therefore thinking the happiness comes from the cake, therefore 2 slices is doubly good. And then 3 slices even better, exponentially good. So we know what happens after 3 slices, don't we? Ugh. So what happens? We go for the short-term pleasure, the unstable. It's that happiness, the suffering that we're running towards. And at the same time, we avoid anything that's unpleasant or uncomfortable at our own expense. So if you've ever avoided going to the doctor because it costs too much, or avoided going to the dentist because you're scared of the dentist. So avoiding that short-term pain, conflating the pain with harm, means that we don't get to go to the dentist, and means we might get an abscess or blood poisoning, or have to have all of our teeth out, or be hospitalized for sepsis or whatever it is, because we've just avoided that small discomfort. So it's really basic, isn't it? But I'll tell you what, we do it all the time. So with all this self-isolation and all of our classes going online, any level of fitness that I had went out the window, because I just spent hours sitting there on the computer. And so I know I should do something to get fit, but my dislike of the unpleasant, the discomfort, the energy trumps it every time. I've done nothing to get fit, and now I'm like all wobbly, like when you've been in bed all day for all week with the flu. So we just avoid discomfort. We're just always trying to be comfortable at our long-term expense. So of course, the way from this one is to think of the long-term benefits of things. With the pain, think of the long-term benefits for a small amount of pain. So that one's pretty clear, but it dominates everything. Even when you're sitting here in class, we're always trying to adjust our position to get comfortable. And while we can wriggle and no one can see us because we're online, then it's okay. But the moment we can't, then it turns into its opposite. Then the true nature of the situation reveals itself, which is it's not actually lasting pleasure after all. So this one is why we fritter our life away, and before we know it, days, months and years have gone by, and then suddenly we're old and now we have a bucket list and it's all too late. Then we have the next one, gain and loss. So advertisers know this about sales, don't they? That, you know, buy two, get one free. And we're going, woohoo, profit. We love to profit, to gain. So we go and spend all this money on something we never would have even bought anyway. Why does this work? It works because we instinctually, we want to gain, we want to profit from things, and we don't want to lose anything. And so then we end up with what's called a false economy, where we'll, oh, that's on the other one, sorry, of loss and deterioration, for instance, where we'll go, oh, okay, I'll just buy a $5 pair of shoes because I don't want to spend too much money. And then next month they're broken, we've got to buy another $5 pair of shoes. And then they're broken again. So we have this aversion to spending the money to actually just get a good pair of shoes that are going to last. And we have this instinctual wish to gain and to profit and acquire things. And again, it's because we think our happiness comes from out there. So we get some things, and then you know, we think they're going to make us happy, and then the happiness wears off. We're a bit disappointed. So then we think, oh no, I just need more things. It's also why those email scams work, why people send money on the email scams. So I read this story in the New Yorker of various people that have been got by those Sierra Leone, you know, send money, inheritance, blah, blah, whatever they are. And some of the people that have been caught by those are really intelligent professionals, you know, that you'd think professors and doctors and whatever, surely they'd know better, but it's nothing to do with intellect. It's this worldly concern that drives us. It's on an instinctual level. So the emails come in and you can't tell the difference between if it's legit or not, and you send the money off. And then it's that one of throwing good money after bad. As long as you keep on paying them, you can be in this fantasy that it's all legit and all okay. But if you go, I've been had, I've wasted my money, now suddenly you have to admit you've wasted all your money. So this is what people do. They just keep on throwing money at it. It's too embarrassing. They throw money at it. And that way, the whole fantasy keeps going. And this is how come all those emails still keep on coming, because they actually work. So, yeah, this deep instinctual wish to gain profit and acquire more, and a aversion to loss, so much so that we will throw good money after bad over and over and over again so as not to admit defeat. I've put a picture there of a poor old balding man, because, you know, the amount of money that that guys spend on hair loss, or that anyone spends on plastic surgery. You know, we don't want to lose our looks, lose our youth, and we spend, as a culture, more on that than on our health. It shows the insanity of it, doesn't it? Then the next two, a little bit more psychological in a way, seeking praise, admiration and approval from others, and shying away from a criticism or blame or abuse. So in terms of praise and admiration, even as adults, we can crave the acknowledgement or appreciation from our parents. We want them to recognize who we are as human beings. We want their approval, in a way, their seal of approval or acknowledgement. But We don't want the rest of the package, which is perhaps their criticism or their advice. We just want the good bit. So that's on one side. The other one for blame and criticism or abuse is, for instance, it's how difficult it is to be a whistleblower in an organization, because people do shoot the messenger. Whoever brings the bad news is associated with the bad news. And so if you're a whistleblower, people will look badly on you because you've made life more uncomfortable for them, and no one wants the discomfort. So it's really difficult. You can be really stuck here, because on one hand, if you don't say anything, it eats away at your conscience, and that has terrible psychological effect. You cannot live with yourself, and it can ruin the whole rest of your life. But if you do say something, it has an external effect as well. People don't like you because you've upset the order of things, and you may lose your job, and it may become more difficult for your family. So that also is more difficult. So we just shy away usually from the immediate criticism or blame or abuse. And that'll eat away at us psychologically. And we'll do all sorts of things, humiliate ourselves just to get approval and admiration. Just think about the end of a relationship when it all got messy and we just wanted them to just be nice to us, and we ended up groveling. You know, I was going to say we've all done it. Perhaps we haven't, but, you know, some of us have. Praise and blame. It can affect how we view ourselves as a human being. The feedback that we get from others. And also, it's why we're so terrified of feedback. Because, again, we think that if someone criticizes us or shows us our faults, that makes us a faulty person. Doesn't it? We associate ourselves with our faults. And actually, it's important to get feedback, because how else are we going to develop? But we shy away from it. Why? Because we're sucked into this worldly concern. We just want to feel nice with the praise. We don't want any criticism. And it really means that we cut ourselves off from being able to develop. It takes bravery, but in the long term, it's so much better. And that leads to the last one, the pair of success or failure. So no one wants to be a loser, and everyone wants success or fame or status or reputation. You know, we kind of gravitate to us. I remember when I was little and at school, kids used to say, oh, I want to be famous. So that kind of status or reputation where you just want lots and lots of people to admire you, to be perceived as being successful. But actually, if you look at the life stories of famous people, it's terrible. They can't do anything. They can't even go to the park with their dog anymore, ever. And there are some rock stars, really amazing singers and things. I was just thinking, say, for instance, Tom Waits. He can get around anywhere and no one recognizes him. And it's great because he doesn't have that fame as such. He's not stopped in the street. But if you're Angelina Jolie or one of the royals or something, your life is not your own and never will be. And yet, I can remember at school, everybody wanted to be famous. The other thing too, that fear of failure means that we stop investigating things. It stops us doing things that we might want to do because we don't want to be shown up or intimidated. And so many people don't learn to drive, or don't learn how to crochet, or how to cook, or how to have a relationship because of fear of failure. Oh yeah, that's right, Lou. So we're not really helping children now at school because there's no first, second and third. Everyone gets a participation ribbon. Yeah, I've thought about that often, and it's kind of like it recognized that that thing of status, first, second or third, but it didn't give the right solution. Because there is clearly a first, second, third and all the rest. That's just a conventional truth. But what we've done is gone, therefore, whoever gets first is a more important person than all the rest. So we've placed it kind of, it's like an inherent truth, inherent's out there. The person who's first is important and nobody else is. And that's actually what should have been addressed, rather than just making first, second and third not exist anymore. So, you know, whoever runs the fastest, yep, they've run the fastest, and they should be acknowledged for that. They came first, but it doesn't mean they're a better person. So probably what would have been better was to have a whole range of things so that everybody got a chance to go first, and everybody got a chance to experience you're not a failure if you don't win. Because just giving everyone a participation ribbon is actually pandering to this worldly concern of everybody's a success and you must be a success to matter, to be worth something. Whereas actually the fact that you're alive and you have feelings is what makes you matter. So this, I mean, one of the examples is the Black Lives Matter movement, isn't it? That what the Black Lives Matter is pointing out is that even though you're born into a class or a race that is downtrodden, you still matter. So it's important to actually speak that truth and say we all matter. But where it lies in is that we all matter despite what socioeconomic background we come from, despite the colour of our skin. Because all of those are actually conventional truths. In terms of our society, you know, black people don't have as much success, status, fame, aren't taken as seriously. Women don't have as much success, aren't taken as seriously. So in terms of a conventional truth, we can't belittle that, and that's why you have to say Black Lives Matter to point it out that they do. But yeah, to not pander then to these 8 worldly concerns, but look deeper. Why do they matter? So there was a story here about success and failure that I wanted to share with you. It was another story that I read in the New Yorker of a war games that the American administration was running. You know, different countries run them every year or two, and so it was an army exercise, the American army, and they had one bunch of people were going to be the defenders, and the other bunch of the people were going to be the terrorist invaders, and they were going to have this war scenario and test all their equipment and their strategies. And so the administration, the army, got divided up into 2. And so the general who was leading the terrorist invaders, he just decided to do what terrorist invaders would do, which is break the rules. And so he started the exercise early and got them all on the hop, and he won. He won the exercise because of that. And the administration was so embarrassed that they declared that exercise null and void and made them run it again so that the army won. So that's how important success is, to be perceived to be successful, totally forgetting the whole point, which is to learn how to protect your country. Oh, no, that's secondary. Got to be perceived as successful first. And so they sacked the general that that played the part of the terrorist invaders because it was just too embarrassing. It was a wrong result. So that's, I mean, I find that a really funny example, but we do that all the time ourselves, don't we? So the 8 worldly concerns, when we look at it in our life, our whole life is dominated by this. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche has often said that whilst we are motivated by these worldly concerns or unstable concerns, we're not practicing Dharma. It's not Dharma. It's worldly Dharma or worldly truth. It's a worldly practice, and that's as far as it goes. It stays within the confines of this life and a very, very short time scale. So much effort and energy is put into it. So to actually practice Dharma, we've got to free ourselves from these worldly preoccupations. So let's do a little meditation on this, shall we? A contemplation of how to let go of the 8 worldly concerns. So get comfortable and take a nice deep breath. And let's think about first gain and loss. So just reflecting, do you want more possessions than you actually need? I mean, that question can stop me in my tracks. And the wealth and possessions, do they bring lasting or permanent happiness? Or once you get them, do they also bring worry? Worry about if they'll break or lose them, or if a part was missing? Do you put others out? Disregard the welfare of others in pursuit of just what you want? Do you remember to actually enjoy those things? So what is it that you have to remember so that you can actually enjoy those worldly possessions? So one of the things is that the happiness, the enjoyment doesn't come from the object. It's a condition. Our state of mind has to be happy for us to be able to enjoy anything. And then think about success and failure. How are they bound together? What do they depend on? You know, if we're going to have a success, then there's necessarily a failure. Does success in one area bring failure in another? Focusing on one area, work or status, failure in another, relationships and home. And is there such a thing as success that can never be lost or surmounted? And if you have a failure, is it permanent? And then thinking about praise and criticism. Do nice words make a real difference in your life? But are those nice words, those compliments, are they enough? Are they ever enough? And with criticism, well, how can we learn from our mistakes or develop if we avoid criticism or a critique? Or if any critique we experience as criticism? And then thinking about pleasure and pain. So what do they depend on? Are they permanent? Is the momentary pleasure that we have worth all the effort we put into it? Are there some things that we're happy to experience some discomfort for a bigger picture or a bigger goal? So pursuing these worldly concerns, we're like the moth flying to the flame. We don't expect to get burnt. It's a shock every time. Can you imagine not being distracted? Can you imagine being free of those short-term preoccupations? So think of a couple of things that are most important to you. What's the most important in your life? What do you value the most? And then reflecting on your actions, say, for this week. How have they supported those things? What's the ratio? How much energy have you put into those things that matter the most to you? What do you need to change? So in a way, you can ask the question, what would you be doing right now if you knew you couldn't fail? What would you be aiming for right now if you knew you couldn't fail? So let that answer settle deeply into your mind. And from a Buddhist point of view, what we could aim for, the biggest thing that we can aim for is our own complete liberation from suffering and all of its causes, and to bring everyone else to that state as well. So dedicating the efforts of this contemplation to having courage to fulfill what's our natural potential. Take a nice deep breath in, out through the mouth. So, did you like the contemplation? Oh yes, Lou, you put a quote here about having a favourite dress and only wearing it on special occasions, which might only be once. That's right. It's also like having a white couch and just having it covered in plastic for the 20 years that you have it. So all of those examples, they're They're pretty clear, aren't they? And yet we do them all the time. So those 4 worldly concerns, and the bumper sticker for this week is don't give up what you want most, those really big things, the things that matter the most, for just what you want now, just those worldly immediate things. So what this kind of points out is that it's our attachment that ruins everything. And our attachment to those external things, thinking that our happiness comes from out there, that's attachment. And attachment has an element of what's called cognitive fusion, that if something feels good, we think it is good. So something's pleasant, we think it's good for us. If it's success, we just want success, we don't want failure, even though it's actually through failure that we learn. We just want praise. But look at those rock stars or, movie stars that are just surrounded by everybody that praises them. And then they just end up dying of overdoses and things. You need someone to keep you real. But attachment goes, I just want to feel good. And I just want to feel good now. That's what's good for me. So what attachment does, it overvalues things, it's biased, it has expectations, projections, all of those mistakes, just on that one side of the pleasant side of those worldly concerns. Our preoccupation is with instant gratification. We just want the short-term happiness again and again and again. But what this does, it's like drinking the salt water. Yes, we do get short-term satisfaction, no doubt about that. But it's never enough. We need more and we need it quicker. It's a real addiction. And so what happens, the more short-term gratification we get, the more long-term craving we have. The more filled with angst and despair we become, that we can end up being one of those people that has everything but just cries every morning. So following the craving actually deprives us of the peace and happiness that we can actually develop ourselves within. So here's a little picture. Shut up and give me the cookie. So there's quite a famous experiment that they did with kids. They put them in a room with a bowl of cookies in front of them. And they were told you can have, that's right, one or 2 cookies. You can have the cookies now and that's it. Or if you don't eat them now, you can have a whole bowl later. So this was to test, that urge for instant gratification. And so then they filmed these poor kids, of what their responses were, of how they tried to to stop themselves grabbing that cookie straight away. And so they do everything that they possibly could. They'd sit on their hands, stare at the cookie. They'd look everywhere but the cookie, distract themselves. Some of them just ate the cookie straight away. And I've got to say, when I read about this experiment, I just thought, I'm one of those kids. I would have eaten the cookie straight away. Anyway, they did a longitudinal study and they found that the kids that ate the cookie straight away, even if the great big differences in an economic background, at the end of this longitudinal study, regardless of where they started out, they had less finances, they were less financially stable, and less stable relationships, less education. They were less educated, regardless of where they started. So it was an across-the-board thing. Lou, you said I struggle with attachment to relationships. Same thing. That's right. We're like a moth to the flame. We crave the feedback and the acknowledgement from others to feel good about ourselves. But because we're not feeling good about ourselves from our side, it's never enough. So if that person doesn't say they love us every day, we start to feel unloved. Or if they start seeing parts of our personality that aren't so good, we're devastated. Or they may be perfect, but somehow it's not enough, so we need to have an affair. So it's that thinking that the happiness comes primarily from out there. So definitely we need to feel worthwhile. We do actually need the help and the support of others, or we don't even have a chance to know what it feels like. But we can't rely on it. Because if we can't develop that within ourselves, it will never be enough. So, I mean, this is the thing that we kind of miss when we miss it. When we first begin a relationship, why it's so nice is the person that we're in a relationship with recognizes all these qualities about us and likes them that we didn't notice. So they've brought our attention to our inner qualities, to the things that are good about us. And so we recognize them, we go, wow, and we feel better, we feel happy. But instead of developing those things now, those inner qualities, we just want more acknowledgement from the other. And that's why that first blush of a relationship always wears off, because after a while, it's not enough. And then we think it's the relationship's failing or the problems with the person or the relationship, rather than that it's actually, that was our little window to start really acknowledging the good parts of us and developing them. Yeah, so attachment to relationships of being from the side of the parent, not being able to help them. That's right, because also if our children think that their happiness comes from outside and their suffering comes from outside, they're going to be as miserable as us as well. So instead of getting distracted and thinking, I'll just fix those things that are harming my child and they'll be happy. No, because there's going to be other things that come in. The thing to really help your children is that ability to be happy in difficult circumstances. But of course, you know, we just think, oh, I'll fix this and I'll fix that, and oh, if I can help them through this and help them through that. There's always going to be problems, and shielding children from problems, it's a short-term benefit with a long-term harm. They have no resilience. So the thing is to, from your side, to really be able to model being able to be strong and calm in the face of problems, of things going wrong, of uncertainty, to show that it means that the whole world doesn't collapse. So spot on, Lou, that's right. This is it in application, why it's so important. So actually our dissatisfaction with life, here we are, quite an affluent society, you know, an amazing social safety net compared to many other places of the world, and yet huge levels of dissatisfaction, depression, and social anxiety. And it's because of that consumerism, that always seeking our happiness from outside of us, whether it's consumerism for things, relationships, entertainment, experiences. So the consumerism masks the hollowness of an exterior life. So even the last generation, where they had less stuff, and so then the thing was to just gather experiences, but it was experiences as a consumer. Just give me more experiences without actually taking them within and having it change you as a person. So experiences as an entertainment. So how to keep a level head? Don't lose your head. Keep calm and don't lose your head. So we come back to the wisdom side of things, what we talked about last week, dependent arising. So because things are dependent arising, because our happiness depends on a whole lot of things, and most of those things outside of us we can't control, what we can control are the causes within. So one of the things to do, how to maintain a level head, cultivate a natural, realistic optimism. So this is from employing that wisdom, the wisdom side of things. And realistic optimism is recognizing that despite everything, we still have a potential for liberation and enlightenment. That's there. That's a potential. Just like despite everything, if you're a human being, you have a potential to read. It's there. That potential's there. So that kind of realistic optimism, to look at the big picture and go, I actually, in my circumstances now, have a chance to become completely free from the ups and downs of psychic existence. So everything's got to be taken in that context. And then we will be naturally optimistic. We won't sweat the small stuff. We'll naturally be able to see where there's room to move in a situation. So it's like, you know, the coronavirus lockdown, it was terrible for the hospitality industry, but it was fantastic for Zoom, for the online retail technology shops. So in any situation, there is going to be an opportunity, and entrepreneurs know this, but also for the inner life, for happiness, we can know this. So that's one thing. Use our wisdom. The other one, recognize attachment for what it is. So the face of attachment at first looks happy. It's anticipation, which is always nice. But then the rest of the story comes. So we're like that moth, you know, the anticipation of how glorious the flame is going to be. That's attachment that thinks that. So it doesn't mean we have to give up on the glory and the happiness. It's just that we can't look for it in that flame. We have to look within. So don't think it means flatlining. It just means looking for the happiness where it can be found. Looking for happiness and the causes of happiness. And like a rule of thumb, don't sweat the small stuff. Big picture, because what those worldly concerns do is they narrow us down, this tunnel vision, to just the next few moments at the expense of the big picture, what matters to us. So our life is fleeting, so focus on what matters to you. And the best way to do this is when you wake up in the morning. So from Buddhist point of view, it's set your motivation. What's the biggest thing I can be aiming for? Liberation and enlightenment. Okay, and what am I going to do today that adds to that? Then you will not be distracted. You won't waste hours on social media and go, oh my God, where did the day go? You'll be focused, naturally focused already. And, you know, the small stuff, at first we might think are really big. But again, it depends on our perspective. So I remember quite a few years ago, there was the runner, the great hurdleist, Sally Pearson. And I don't know if it was before the Olympics or going up to the Olympics, and she was running a race and it was filmed. Oh my God, talk about thought pain. And she tripped over one of the hurdles and broke her wrist. And she was rolling on the field there, screaming in pain. And then afterwards, after it was all bandaged up and everything, she said, oh, I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky it wasn't my ankle. So this is, it hasn't changed anything, but it's changed everything. It's the same with the coronavirus. How lucky are we? So it depends. What are we going to focus on? Let's focus on this natural, realistic optimism. And what to rely on? Instead of relying on those worldly concerns, which preoccupies us. So it's, what are we going to do? If we just take them away, it kind of leaves a vacuum. So what are we going to rely on instead? Where can we find lasting happiness? How can we develop that within ourselves so it's reliable, so it's not circumstantial? What can I rely on? And from Buddhist point of view, what you can rely on are the objects of refuge. So refuge, seeking guidance, protection, everything that we normally look in those worldly pursuits for, we're looking really for ultimate guidance, protection, and happiness, aren't we? So where can we find it? And this is where we get the Buddhist criteria of what's called a valid refuge. So instead of taking refuge in food or sex or relationships or status or money, which is where most of us take our refuge in, what a valid refuge is, meaning one that can actually bring us the happiness that we seek. They have to be free from bondage, free from the rat race. So whatever it is or whoever it is that we place our faith in, our refuge, that we seek guidance from, they have to be free themselves. If they are still in the rat race, it doesn't matter how good it first appears, it's not going to do it. So extreme sports and playing the stock market, it's kind of fun for a while, but it ends badly. In extreme sports, people die. In the stock market, I just read this great quote today where one of the stockbrokers said, everyone's asking, do I put money in now or do I take it out or whatever? And he said, you can make all of these decisions, but in the end, we're all dead. So that comes from one of the most famous stockbrokers in the world. Extreme examples, sport, extreme sport, never fun. That's right. So I watch a lot of those documentaries on marathon runners or people that scale the mountains and things like that. And they never think that they're going to be the one who dies. So yes, we can become free from bondage of cyclic existence, but who we place our faith in has to have already freed themselves. So whether it's the Buddha or whatever spiritual path or religion that sits very well with you, you have to see, have they been able to free themselves completely from suffering? Because if they haven't, they're not a valid refuge. So that's the one, but there's more. Do they have a method that can free others? So it's no good being able to just free yourself. You have to be able to show, practices, a technique, an explanation. How do I get there? We have to find that medicine for the mind. So that's another criteria as well. There are many people that are like solitary realizers. They're on their own path, but they don't have the skills to be able to share with others or to have methods. There are many psychological methods, and modern psychology has many really good self-help kind of techniques or quite in-depth techniques about cognitive behavior training and all of that. But it doesn't go far enough because they haven't completely freed themselves from bondage. So they have the method, but they don't have the first one. So we need both. And I find the perfect kind of recipe is to have the Buddhist worldview and then use positive psychology methods, evidence-based mindfulness training, blah, 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 methods with the Buddhist worldview, because then you have both of those two criteria. If you only have one, it's not enough. The other two, great compassion for all, unbiased, and helps without favoritism. This is what guards against fundamentalism and war. Because whatever spiritual tradition, or indeed whatever psychology or politics that we follow, has to have compassion for everybody, not just their country, not just their people, not just women, but men, not just Australia, but the world, not just Buddhists, but non-Buddhists. Because if we don't have compassion for everybody, what we end up doing is harming others, harming the ones we don't care about. And we see where that's got us. So, and then aiming to help everybody, whether Buddhist or not, whether religious or not, whether they're good people or bad people, whether we agree with them or not. If we want to, stamp out racism, we have to help the downtrodden and we have to help the racists, or it's never going to end. So the great compassion for all, being impartial or unbiased, and then aiming to help everyone, whether they harm or help you back, doesn't matter. Really important. So this criteria, this is how you can tell, is the spiritual path I'm on, is it valid? Is it going to help? Or is it going to harm? It's a checklist. It's the ultimate checklist. Wherever we throw our lot in, whether it's politics, psychology, religion, self-help, if it doesn't meet these criteria, it won't turn out well. So this is kind of a really good way to make sure that if we're abandoning those worldly concerns, that we end up in a good direction, a safe direction. So how do we check? We use our reasoning, we investigate, we look at the track record, we check, does it occur with our own experience? Question, question, question. Okay. So it's a lot to take in, isn't it? Renunciation, it's a huge topic. I mean, the thing to remember about renunciation, that without it, we just have more and more suffering. With renunciation, renouncing those worldly concerns and actually developing the happiness within, what happens, if we develop renunciation, we become happier. We have more enjoyment of life. So this is a thing that I really had to remember, to take away from it all. Renunciation means more enjoyment, not less. So there's the worksheet and that meditation and reflection there in the notes. There's a couple of questions there to help you check up about going for the short-term comfort at the expense of the long-term happiness. Because the first step is to get our head around it. Then the next step is to remember. That's right. And even just to remember with that short-term craving, yeah, it's going to bring some temporary happiness, but I'm just going to be more thirsty afterwards. So at least try and go for the short-term happiness that is going to lead you on to the long-term happiness. So, if you enjoy being with people, then being with people that encourage a spiritual path, that aren't materialistic. So it's no problem being with people that you enjoy, but have it leading in that really safe direction. And it's fine having things too. And so that's why I kind of like, I have this thirst for things, but then I do give myself cut a little bit of slack, and I go, no such thing as too many books. Because books, they're my fatal flaw, But if I'm going to go for it, at least I'm going to go for something that then I can share with others, that is worth it, that leads me on to, more positive things. So you've got to be practical within this. And remember, renunciation is giving up not just suffering, but the causes of suffering. Right. So let's okay, there's one more question here. Right. The Black Lives Matter. Marching won't change anything. We need to do something every day, not just a one-off. That's right. So the marching is kind of demonstrating. It's almost, it's like a ritual, isn't it? And we need rituals because we have the negative rituals. We need a positive one. And like in Australia, there were some Indigenous Australians that were saying that they were really moved by how many people came out on that march. That it's just, it is literally a demonstration of care. And so we need to go through those motions, but you're absolutely right. Then we need to carry them through. But even to carry them through, we've got to demonstrate that times have changed. That's right. So, and also actually on that one, so Eddie was saying about occasionally people will go, well, everybody matters, white lives matter too. And that the really excellent answer to that one is, it's kind of like being at say a funeral of a child, and so someone is saying about what a beautiful child this person was, and then someone else goes, yeah, but all children are important. And it's like, yes, but that's not the point, so that one, I think it's really, really clear. Of course everybody matters, but within this dependent arising, the more vulnerable and the more downtrodden we have to give more care and concern for, and that's just being realistic. So thus the need for a demonstration and then follow up. You're absolutely right. So let's dedicate the merits, and let's think how excellent of having spent the time like this morning, a real investment in yourself as a human being, to be able to actually develop the causes of happiness and release the causes of suffering. So may everything that we've talked about germinate into realizations. May those realizations grow strong. May we be able to act on them so that we can benefit ourselves and others, all others, the downtrodden and the racists, to bring about a truly peaceful world, and also liberation from ups and downs of cyclic existence, and complete enlightenment for all living beings.